I'm speaking with Lynne Cooke at the National Gallery of Canada, and Lynne is the curator from the National Gallery of Washington, D.C., and she's here to discuss textiles with us for this wonderful exhibition being held now at the National Gallery of Canada. And will you speak to these pieces behind, Lynne? They don't really look like textiles.
When I first conceived this exhibition, I was interested, my starting point was the efflorescence amongst contemporary artists of making work that relates to textiles in some form. Not always with fiber, but sometimes with photography or video as a medium which allows them to explore a particular thematic or subject or so forth. As I got further into it, really through looking very closely at the work of Ed Rosbach, who was an American artist in the post-war era who first wove wall hangings and then in his very in-depth exploration of the history of textiles went toward pre-loom technologies. Not every culture has had weaving. Every culture, going back to earliest human times, has had some form of basketry. Basketry, interlace, knotting or netting or diagonal one over, one under, interlace, formed both containers and it formed protective planes, branches and so forth, for people in different parts of the world using different materials that were to hand, different grasses or trees or palm leaves and so forth. And so I began to look at the ways in which basketry had become of interest to artists working in the 60s and particularly the 70s onwards. And in North America, they were inspired particularly by Rosbach's example. This artist behind me, Ruth Asawa, went to the Bauhaus's manifestation, one of the places where the Bauhaus legacy took root in the US, which was at Black Mountain College. And she studied with Annie Albers, who had been a key figure in the weaving workshop at the Bauhaus in Germany in the interwar years, and with Josef Albers, her partner, her husband. And amongst the many studies, material studies that Josef Albers had his students do, he was very focused on materials. And on a trip to Mexico, Ruth Asawa saw artisans, local craftsmen, making egg baskets by looping wire. And she's very interested in this technique. She went back to North Carolina to school, and she started playing with it. And over the years, she developed this looping technique from which she could make these globes that were centered within other globes. And this created a sculptural language that was unique, and for which she's been greatly celebrated. And in her history, you find moments where she's being possibly positioned in relation to decor and design questions, and more recently, absolutely positioned in relation to modern sculpture. And so in that one history, you can see something of the shifting attitudes to making work in unconventional materials and with somewhat unconventional techniques that we think of as symbolic or representative of vanguard art practice. But if it gets too close to craft, it can risk being commandeered into other categories like the applied arts.
Yes, because textiles have elevated themselves into a definite art form. Yes. And here you have over 70 years of different kinds of textiles in the history.
We're standing in front of this work by Carol Frances Lung, who is an American artist who makes work under the name Frau Fiber, and we see her here knitting a white woolen sock. And she's placed in a factory with automated industrial machines that fabricate regular white socks. And so it's a competition, it's a kind of play in a very ironic way between handcrafting and mass production, which is a question that has been relevant all through the 20th century. Like, why do we value one over the other? What are the advantages of one over the other? Early in the 21st century, there was a kind of resurgence of interest in handcrafting as a form of self-expression, of creativity. Even it was claimed a kind of anti-capitalist gesture. And this movement, craftivism, is somewhat being lampooned here, because what she's knitting is the most banal of artifacts, like a white sock, and it takes her 4.5 hours to knit one white sock, during which the machine spits out 99 pairs. So you might ask, as she does implicitly, what is a good use of one's time, and really what does creativity and self-expression really require? Is it something as mundane as that, or is it something with more imagination and invention? So it's funny and it's interesting. It's kind of beguiling and it brings a kind of meditative cast if you sit watching it long enough. But it's also very key, I think, to opening up questions as one looks around this room of hand-making, specialized technical skills, and also low-wage economies in which manufacturing is seen as an unskilled practice.
Yes, so it must give her satisfaction to be creating by hand, and it's more or less a rebellion against what is happening around her.
Well, except it's an ironical piece, because she's saying what is creative about this monotonous making of something so ordinary. It doesn't involve what we normally think of as imaginative transformation. There are many kinds of self-expression and creativity working by hand, but one has to refine it a little to think really what that means. So what we're looking at here is a collaborative work made between queer artist and activist Liz Collins and a designer had his own label, Gary Graham. They worked together under the name Grizz. And this work is one of a series of works made that respond to the 7 deadly sins, pride. But over time, I think we can see other layers to it, and that's because its starting point is American flags, worn and damaged, flags that have been rent and sewn back together, sutured with these red veins that, can we walk? This a form of what Liz calls knit grafting. So she's working on an automated machine, and she's taking bits and fragments and sewing them back together with these long red lines. And the result is an evening dress, which is definitely rendered. And I think we read it now can read it in terms of gender wars, and pride, obviously, as a very encompassing umbrella movement for many positions. But the gender wars, whether they're wars around transgender positions or queer positions of many kinds, are addressed in this work, literally, in this work, which speaks to the way in which those questions have become so divisive in culture.
This is such a statement. Well, in fact,
Yes.
everything is when you look at it deeply. must have been really interesting for you to
It's been a great research
get this
project.
to- oh,
Yes, no, really endlessly rewarding and obviously unfinished. There are always artists I don't know about. Looking through the Canadian collection here, there are artists whose work I don't know, but when I look at them, I can see they were probably working at the same time as some of the artists here. Their concerns are similar. There's something singular at the same time because other aspects of their biographies or cultural conditions make for rereadings of the same set of preoccupations.
Yes, and this exhibition covers about 70 years.
Yes.
So it's quite a history.
Yes. I think the history from the post-war era when the legacy of the Bauhaus and the historical avant-gardes of the early 20th century, like constructivism in Russia and Sonia Delaunay's work in Paris, all of that, either because of emigration with the rise of Nazis, the fascists in Italy and so on, meant that artists came to this country and brought those
Sensibility.
yes, and aesthetics with them. So that was very fertile here. But also because I think artists working today look back to two different moments, like the late 60s and 70s, which was an extraordinary explosion of avant-garde activity, including the recuperation of textile-based works in what was called second wave feminism. But also in the early 20th century, where fabric and fiber were embraced by avant-garde artists, often painters, mostly women, as the mediums and materials through which to transform society, in the hope of building a more democratic, demotic society with a better quality of life.
Yes, it has a powerful statement throughout history.
Yes, yes.
As you mentioned.
Textiles are so fundamental to human life and culture. They're what we wear every day. Our residences are transformed by them. We're very knowledgeable about textiles. So when walking into a museum, people think, oh, I don't know anything about textiles, but they do. They make decisions about textiles all the time and have throughout their lives.
Yes. Thank you very much, Lynne.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
This is Barb Gray from the National Gallery of Canada. I was just speaking with Lynne Cooke from the National Gallery of Washington, and Lynne is the curator of this wonderful exhibition on textile that you must come and see because it opens your eyes to many, many views of textiles and how the artists have expressed the use of textile over the 70-year history. So I'll sign up now. Hope you'll come and visit. Bye for now.